All right, welcome everyone to another episode of OSS Power-Ups. For those who already know about the format, long time no see. So this is our first candidate today, Marcin Ziąbek. He will talk about QuestPDF. And I'm very excited about this already. But before we start, a couple of formalities. If you have any questions, just post them in either YouTube in the chat or on Twitch. That's a new one for me as well. So we will try to incorporate those as we go here. Second, this webinar, as always, is going to be recorded. So if you have to drop out for some reason, feel free to continue watching later. But it would be nice to have you around here. And since we're talking about that, say hi from where you're watching. That's always nice to see. Since this is the first episode of this for this year, I want to repeat what our original intentions were here, and that is open source development generally in the .NET community. Now, if you look at it from the consuming side, there's really not much of a problem, you could say, because organizations, they like to benefit from OSS projects. So do I, also with my own projects, also partially at JetBrains, of course. But if you look more at the producing side of things, then you surely realize that there are some issues, let's say, and that is that the contributions back are rather insufficient. That is a large sustainability problem because developers, although at first usually, it starts like, I want to produce something, we are all developers. And it's fun at first, but then with raising popularity, all those new questions arrive and feature requests and bugs, etc. So that can put enormous pressure on maintainers. And as a result, because maintainers usually care for their baby, they can run at times into an issue where it's just overwhelming and you kind of fall into something you could say it's a how do you say it, burnout. Yeah. So in our team, particularly the .NET advocates at JetBrains, we thought, what can we do with that? And this Power-Ups format was something that we thought would be cool. So first of all, for all the candidates that we have and guests here, what we do is sponsor them with $100 per month for a full year. Also, just want to repeat that's usually not that is not necessarily projects that we also use, but rather where we see potential. Same as with Marcin today. Also, we want to give a platform and, of course, raise awareness about the project. And we also would like to share our strengths, which are very specific in some regards, like sometimes with profiling, creating graphics, CI/CD, plugins. Plugins is usually a very interesting topic, but it doesn't always fit in, let's say. But if you actually watch, and let me just switch to our other site here. That's our landing page for the OSS Power-Ups with all the guests that we already had. So you can see first candidate we had was Jeremy Skinner with Fluent Validation. Another one which was really fun was also with Simon Kropp and Verify. That extension was really cool to write, and a couple of more information also. And I really, really recommend you also to watch this episode with Rachel and Aaron and Paul talking about open source sustainability and all that. So really, really recommend that. But as you can see, here is already our today's guest, Marcin, and I will bring Marcin on the stage here. Hello, Marcin.
Hi, welcome.
You.
To be honest, right now I'm just completely stressed out, even though 5 minutes ago I was calm. But today I'm really delighted to be with all of you, and I really appreciate your invitation. Thank you.
No, not a problem at all. But and also keep calm. This is in the spirit of OSS maintainers, so we don't want to stress you out. If something goes wrong, that's not so bad. and we will just continue talking about the project.
Yeah, we can just always improvise.
True. So this was interesting with you. Actually, the first time I got to know about the project was actually from my colleague Martin. But then first time I saw you active was on Reddit, and you're very active poster there with regular updates about the project. But I would be interested, when did you start, and how did these things come along that you thought, okay, let's start with something to generate PDFs and all that?
Okay, so it's very hard to say where exactly everything has started. So during my studies at bachelor's degree and master's degree, I have a couple of tasks when I wanted to generate a PDF file in a form of a data summary. However, I was always able to find some workaround to make stuff happen. And then around a year ago at my current company, we have tried to generate literally dozens of different PDF types. So for each different report, we wanted to generate a special file with a special structure and layout. And it turned out that preparing that layout separately for each report type is extremely time consuming. So, a short calculation having like 15 or 20 different PDF types, and then around a week for each type gives you a quite high estimation. So it was a time when I thought, okay, maybe I can just find something different, not using a paid library, but maybe combine something that already exists and prepare a solution that will allow us to meet the deadline with higher confidence. So I found SkiaSharp, that is a graphical library created by Google, if I'm not mistaken, and it's being used in all sorts of stuff, like in the Chromium and Chromium-based web browsers, so Chrome, Edge, and Opera, if I'm not mistaken, and also as a rendering engine in Flutter and Xamarin. And coincidentally, SkiaSharp has some additional API that can record different operations that you perform on top of a canvas, and then it can translate those operations into a PDF file. So I decided, okay, it's quite a nice, simple to understand API. I can build additional abstraction layers on top of it and hopefully create my reports. But the problem was simple. Entire API provided by SkiaSharp is a low-level one. It allows you to draw a text, or maybe a couple of lines or rectangles, or add an image, but that's it. There were no, pre-made components like tables or lists or maybe headers or page. So all that stuff needed to be created manually in my simple prototype. So I usually like to think about it like a SkiaSharp being an assembler, allowing you to talk to the processor or write a comment to a PDF file, where I created a library that gives you all those built-in structures, which is a programming language when you think about it.
So because of your let's say demand at your company, now a lot of companies profit from this very nice API, which we will take a look at. And yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, I think so.
It was also funny. We had a very long, first I was like trying to schedule our setup talk last week for like half an hour, and in the end we talked for like 2 hours, which was really interesting. But it's interesting to see that maintainers always jump also from different areas to another area. Like for instance, you don't just build the library, but you also do the promotion on Reddit. Like I said, then you think, okay, I have to rework the documentation, and it's a lot of different work, let's say, that all comes together maintaining a library, right?
Exactly. So finishing my short story, at the company, I just created a prototype that was enough to meet our needs. And then I was just thinking, what would happen if I push more energy and more motivation into the project? Making proper API, a good readable documentation, and I've done it. And at that point of time, I thought the quality is all I need to make the library popular. And honestly, I was very mistaken. You can create a great library and do all your best to add new features and improve the documentation and whatever you see that is beneficial to your product or to your, let's say, a child, but it does, that work does not find any audience. And back then I decided, okay, maybe I can try to find people who may be interested in generating PDFs with QuestPDF. So I wrote my first Reddit post, not knowing what to put there at all, but I
When
was
was
really
that?
positively surprised by the result.
When was the first Reddit post that you made? Or
Oh, I'm
when?
not sure. It was like a half of a year ago, 6, 7 months ago, I suppose.
No,
Something like that.
not so much. And you started with the library when again?
A year ago.
A year ago. Well, for that, and of course, I also took a look, in preparation, all that. Very, very nice work, I have to say. And yeah, it's this, like I said, at one side, you want to develop new features, but you really have to take into account people won't use it if you don't have proper documentation. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. The
Okay. Should
thing about
we?
documentation completely changed my mind, to be honest. Like, you usually think that just having a great set of features and proper API is totally enough. And it turns out that you need to present your work properly and help others to start working with your library. And in the end, you end up spending half your time preparing documentation.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, the effort it takes is definitely not to underestimate. Let's say, yeah, it takes quite a while. We both talk from experience, but yeah, it
Exactly.
takes quite a while. And we also talked a lot last time about whether what would be the better approach. Like, I'm a big fan of prosa documentation, which is just manually written, not necessarily with XML docs, etc. You were more like in a maybe you say it yourself, like with the
Well,
merge
personally, I have the same
approach.
opinion as you. So I've seen a lot of libraries that attempt to generate documentation automatically,
Hmm.
and quite often that documentation is not useful in particular. Uh, Having an API and description for all classes in the namespace is great, but such documentation misses that crucial step how to connect all pieces together. So similarly to you, I created a documentation manually, writing it in the Markdown, and I find that giving a lot of examples how to connect all those pieces is the most helpful one, the most uh, you know um, proper way to write documentation.
Speaking of, in your documentation, I forgot. Do you have copy buttons for your examples?
Oh, I don't. I don't. So um, I use ViewPress that is based on the Vue library,
Hmm.
and it has a very limited set of features. Literally, you write your markdown files, you put your images in the proper folder, and that's it. You just generate the documentation web page and host it somewhere. But definitely, I would like to explore other documentation libraries similar to ViewPress, but hopefully with more features and capabilities. And I certainly would like to introduce a copy button there.
Yeah, maybe that is something. I just want to give a quick reference, which I saw last time on the ThoughtWorks Technology Radar. They have something, and if you care, just look it up there at the latest Technology Radar. They have something they call, I think, quadrants of documentation, because they're very different needs. Something for learning, something for reference, etc. So that was interesting. I mean, in some way you already know these kinds of different documentation should exist, but clearly having the picture in front of you is a bit more well, you're more conscious about which of these quadrants could I improve in terms of documentation or that. So yeah,
Exactly.
But
once you know it is obvious. But before you get that information and you see it yourself, it's not that obvious anymore.
Yeah. Okay, should we start with sharing your screen now? Are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
I will add you. As always, I will stay around asking after I close my window and try to stick around, ask questions from the chat, and you just give us a bit of introduction to QuestPDF.
Okay, certainly. So please feel free to interrupt. I'm always happy to answer any questions. So right now we are on the QuestPDF repository webpage on GitHub. And in here, everything happens thanks to help of many people. But before we go into details and into a real example how you can use QuestPDF in your own project, I would like to quickly go through a short description what QuestPDF really is. So as I said before, it is a .NET library for generating PDF files in your C# and .NET applications. It is based on Skia Sharp, that is a rendering engine that translates all operations into a PDF file. And on top of that, QuestPDF gives you a layout engine. So you may consider different structures, but in QuestPDF, I decided to give you a long list of different components, which are simple to understand and simple to use. So for example, we have components such as border, background, padding. So concepts that are quite straightforward, quite predictable. And then you can combine all those different elements with more complex layout structures like table or grid or row or column. And once you have those structures, you can build highly composable document layouts. What's quite interesting in QuestPDF as well is the way how you write code. So in C#, a lot of modern libraries decide to create a Fluent API that is kind of a discoverable approach, how to help the developer write proper code. And I decided to go the same way. So in QuestPDF, I'm using special interfaces with extension methods. And then your IDE can show you all available methods in your code. And this way you can, without using documentation, you can try to understand what operations are possible and how you can combine all stuff together. But how Fluent API really works and how you can create PDF document with it, we can talk within a minute. But before I go and create a new project, I would like to ask you, all of you, if you find QuestPDF useful or worth it, please consider giving it a star on GitHub. I know that most developers are trying to assess the quality of the library based on the star count and what happens in the repository. So if you think it's useful to you, please definitely consider giving it a star. Okay, so let's go to our best IDE out there, to Rider, and I would like to show you the process from the very beginning. So I will create a new C# project. Okay, perfect. So we have our C# project, and the first thing we can do is to install QuestPDF. It is being available as a NuGet file. So just choose one and add it to your dependencies. Okay, perfect. So we are using .NET 6 with all those additional syntax features. Let's start with creating a document. So we can use a document class. And in here, just make sure that you use a QuestPDF Fluent namespace. And using that class, we have access to a create method. It gives us an action with iDocument container interface within which we can put all the content of the PDF file. Inside a document, you may have multiple different pages of different settings. So for example, a half of your document can have A4 pages, and the second half can have a letter size pages. But in this example, we'll just use one page size. So using just page method, we get access to a page descriptor within which we will put all the content. But actually, this code is all you need to create your first empty file. So let's take a look what the create method does. It returns us a document object instance. And when we use IntelliSense, we will find that we have access to multiple interesting methods. Obviously, we can generate PDF file, and it can be written as returned as a byte array, or written into a stream, or into a file using a file path. Similarly, you have access to XPS format, which is a Microsoft equivalent to PDF files. You can also generate images in a form of a list of byte arrays. But the thing that we are mostly interested today is another method called show in previewer. So what this method does is to open a special application developed with QuestPDF that will show you the result of your work. So it is based on the hot reload capability in .NET 6. It watches all changes in your code and updates the document preview accordingly. Okay, good. So we added that show in previewer method. We can try to run the application and see what happens.
I remember there was a second. Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what I wanted to say. There was a second NuGet package, right?
Exactly. So I specifically uninstalled that NuGet package so I can show you the fresh first start with the QuestPDF. So in this case, the exception tries to help you and suggests maybe you want to run that command to install your QuestPDF.previewer tool. So let me copy it and just quickly execute. What it does is to connect to, so QuestPDF Previewer, as I said, is a special application. It is being distributed as a NuGet package, and it can be installed on your development machine as a NuGet, as a .NET tool. And we can obviously use a global flag, so that tool is available everywhere. This way, you can use previewer capabilities without adding any dependencies to your C# project, which honestly is quite important when you want to go to production. QuestPDF Previewer will run automatically with your code and show in previewer method, but you can also run it locally when you type QuestPDF-previewer. Like this. Oops. So this is quite an interesting approach how you can create your own tools that are installable on the development machine. But let me close it. We have installed our tool, so let's rerun the application. Okay, perfect. I will put the preview on the right and make some more space for our document. So as I said before, the preview is listening to any changes in your code and will update accordingly. In Visual Studio, you usually need to save a file, or in Rider, you need to apply changes. By default, the page, page uses a couple of default values, for example, the size, and it is an A4 size, but we can also create different sizes of a document. So let me create another page or another group of pages where I would use another page size like this. And let's say I can use size A5 in the landscape mode. And when I apply changes, the previewer does apply. So we can certainly see that an A5 page is a smaller one, and in this case, due to a landscape flag, it's rotated around 90 degrees. Okay, good. So let's come back to our primary page and try to add some content. A page is a classical example of multi-child container. In page, you can use you can specify 5 different slots. It is a header, a content, footer, background, and foreground. Header is a slot that is always visible at the very top of a document. A footer is always visible at the very bottom, and both header and footer are repeated on all pages in the document. However, the content is placed in between header and footer and always takes all available space. On the other hand, the background and foreground slots can be used to add watermarks underneath and on top of your primary content. So let's make a try and create our first header. In this case, we can, to visualize somehow, we can, let's say, assign some background color. But before we do it, let's see what the header method does. It returns us the iContainer interface, which is one of the most important ones in the library. Most of the elements that I've mentioned before, like padding, border, table, images, text, can be applied into the container. So whenever you have access to that iContainer interface, you can just follow your steps using the method chaining approach and just add more and more content inside. So in this case, we'll use a background element to add some color. Let's say blue and lighten too. So you may find that QuestPDF support just a standard set of colors using hexadecimal values, but it also gives you access to a color set defined by material design approach. So if you are not a designer, it's certainly a good start to use a proper set of colors. Let's say we'll use lighten too. When I refresh the preview, nothing happened. Why it is so? So the reason is simple. The header slot, what it does is to take all available width, but its height is minimal. And if you do not put any content inside, the height will be 0, and therefore the header will be not visible. I can force the header to take some height using another element called height. And in this case, we'll find that this method accepts a value in the points unit, where 72 points is just 1 inch in most devices and in the PDF specification, but it also accepts values and an additional unit. So let's say I can use 1 inch like this. When I update the preview, and it indeed takes 1 inch of the page. I can use similar approach to populate the footer. So please let me copy that code. And instead of header, I will use footer slot. And additionally, I can change the color. Okay, so it already shows us that header is on the top, footer on the bottom, and in the middle, we have empty space. So let's populate that space using similar method and using yet another color.
Yeah, one thing I have to say already, it's funny what you said, or cool that you include these colors when you said if you're not a designer, because developers' approach is always red, you know, with borders, completely solid red. And yeah,
Exactly.
this
And
looks much nicer already.
it's quite important when you want to show results of your work to somebody. So it does not need to be the state of the art, but at least let's make it looking quite good.
A little decent, yeah.
Exactly. So in this case, you may notice that I do not use the height method. I don't need to force the content element to take any size, because as I mentioned before, it takes all space in between header and footer, all the remaining space. Okay, so this is a document with very simple structure, but most of the printers cannot print that well in the page corners. So therefore, we need to add some margin. So the page descriptor gives us access not only to our slots like header, footer, content, and so on and so forth, but also additional settings about the page, like a size, or maybe a foreground color, or maybe even margin. And in this case, in multiple places of QuestPDF, you may find that there are multiple different overloads of the same capability. So to make your code more concise and easier to read. Well, in this case, I want to just apply the same value of margin to both four sides of the page. And again, similarly to the height component or a page size, I can provide just a value in points, or I can be more specific and use one of the units. So let's say in this case, I will use 2 centimeters. Obviously, it doesn't make much sense if you combine different unit systems, but it is just for an example. Okay, so we added some margin. And the next step that we'll do is to replace that orange box with, well, maybe a set of different boxes. So this is only one entity, but what about generating multiple ones? So my goal now is to create a set of gray rectangles that will be placed between header and footer. And if one of the rectangles does not fit in the available area, it will be moved to the next page. So one rectangle will be below another one, and below. So it creates us a nice column of items, similarly to how CSS calls such layout. So let's create a new column. The column is again one of the multi-child containers, and inside it you can instantiate multiple different children, and it is done by the item method. Item, when we take a look using IntelliSense, yet again it returns us the iContainer method. That means we can follow the method chain, adding more and more content, similarly to the slots like header and footer. So whenever you are in the API, you can use the same set of tools to add your content. And in this case, I will just follow the same approach with a background, this time using just a gray color, okay, medium. And I will force the height of that rectangle into, let's say, 100 points. Okay, so I have one rectangle, but the question is how we can multiply it, how we can instantiate multiple instances of a rectangle. Well, we are in C#, we have access to all C# capabilities, including if statements, conditions, loops, methods, and everything else that is available. So let's create me just a C# loop using the enumerable object and the range method. So in this case, we can generate maybe 25 different rectangles. So just to make sure, this range method generates us a list of 25 items, or to be specific, the enumerable object. So the body of that loop will iterate 25 times. When I put the code inside, it's all we need to generate multiple different rectangles. Okay, good. So let's make them more obvious that they are indeed separate entities. To do so, we can use a padding that is placed below the rectangle like this. Padding bottom, let's say of a size of 25. And indeed, it creates as a space between each item. But there is a better way how we can accomplish the same requirement. The column element does not only allows us to add an item, but also to specify a spacing between each item. So we can follow the same approach. And again, we have a choice between just points or more meaningful units like inches. So let's use maybe 25. And additionally, what I want to do is to add some little space between header and content, and later between content and footer. So to do so, I can just add a merging vertical in here, the size of 25. Okay, so
since the question is in the chat, can you also put borders around these individual items?
yeah, sure, I can. So I can do it here. First of all, you specify your border, and you can provide the thickness of the border. So let's say 2 points. And then if you want, so that is already what you need. You have the border. I can make it slightly more visible. You can also specify a color of the border like it is, using the same API like previously. So maybe I will use hexadecimal value for an orange color. This. You can also apply border to one of the sides. So as you see, let's say we apply a border to a bottom side of a rectangle, like 5, and maybe a thicker one to a left side.
Now,
Like
one
this.
thing I have to say, and Martin also said it in the chat, where was it? Here. Preview is really, really cool use of hot reload. I mean, I cannot imagine, recompiling everything and inspecting after every change. Like this is absolutely awesome. One question I have on the previewer, you have these 3 icons on the lower left. What are they doing?
Okay, so the first one, so the previewer does not generate a PDF. It communicates with your C# code. It transforms the information about the document, but in the end, the preview is just a preview. It's not a PDF. So sometimes you may want to just generate your PDF document and open it in the default browser on your PC. So this is a functionality of the first button. The second button is, well, you are working on your code and you just forgot how something is working in QuestPDF. So maybe you want to open documentation, specifically API reference, where you have access to the description of all available elements and components within the library. You can get some examples that you can take inspiration from and speed up your development. And you also have access to a getting started tutorial, which describes how you can divide your implementation into proper layers and connect all pieces together in your final product. As well as the documentation contains some patterns and practices. For example, how you can, let's say, include a chart within your PDF document. Where it is. Implementing charts. So if you need a chart, we most probably have a proper example.
Really,
and the
really
third
nice.
button is, well, about sponsorship of QuestPDF. It's something that you don't need to do, but it certainly adds some motivation to me and other people. And, well, as I stated somewhere here, I can even write some unit tests. That much help such sponsorship can give to a person.
One is following after we finished. Also, there were 2 other questions. The first is probably very interesting. Does the previewer work on macOS too?
So the previewer was written in Avalonia, which is basically a WPF rewritten to multi-system approach. So technically, previewer should run on macOS and Linux, hopefully. However, as far as I know, the hot reload capability is currently available only in .NET 6 on Windows. I may be wrong, to be honest, but I expect that if I'm right, I expect that Microsoft will extend the scope of the hot reload feature, and it should be available on each operating system. And therefore, the QuestPDF previewer should work everywhere.
There's another question. I was kind of also reminded of CSS a lot while we walked through with border and unit, etc. So is using these Martin is asking, is using these borders a good way to debug? Like in CSS, folks often set red borders. What I said, to inspect an element.
Well, you certainly can. There are other ways how you can debug your document. For example, it's something that I wanted to show you later, but let's give it a try. So
We can also save it for later if you want.
No, that's
Your
okay.
choice.
We can always repeat the same stuff with more details. But there is an element called debug area. So let me put it maybe in here between header and footer. The debug area, you can give it a name. So maybe gray boxes. And when you accept, you will find that area that is currently selected with a name. So
that's really nice.
So it's quite useful when you are writing code and you are not particularly sure what that specific set of lines is capable of, or what part of the document it generates. So you can use a debug area with even different colors, as far as I remember, and this way you can highlight part of the PDF and know where you are.
Very cool. And I can probably also do this, let's say, when I have these 25 items, I could also do this for the 5th element specifically, right?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay.
So let's maybe add it. This can be lighter, and add it in here. So first of all, we can add the debug area, and let's say we will put the box number. So therefore, we generated a set of boxes with each value that is unique. But you said that you want to apply that debug area conditionally, right? So when you want to perform a condition,
Maybe, yeah.
Sorry?
Maybe sometimes conditionally. Yeah, I was just thinking.
Yeah. So you may think, okay, it's quite difficult how I can conditionally apply, an additional element if it's a method chain. So you can use the element approach like this. And inside the element, you can use your if statement. So maybe something like this. If I is equal to 5, you can apply your debug area. Now we have slightly too little space. And otherwise, you can just continue your chain, returning the container. Okay, so it's one of the hot reload capabilities limitations. When you introduce additional lambda statements, you may sometimes want to rerun the application. Oops. Where I am? Okay, so as you see, the previewer does not close. It still sits open and listening to all the changes from your code. And in this case, we have been able to apply that debug area specifically to the item number 5.
But by the way, just to give you even more motivation today, we have very, very high reach. So when I ask people should say hi, we have people from Italy, Atlanta, Poland, your home country, Switzerland, Germany. Now someone from Nigeria was saying hi, Colombia. So quite far reach today.
Welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be with all of you today. Honestly, it just increases the stress I have, but let's just continue.
No one is watching. No one.
Good. Okay, good. So we have our boxes. Let's remove that border for now. to simplify the code. And when we take a look at the document, we managed to generate a couple of pages. So maybe it is a good time to add a basic information about the page number in the footer element. Okay. So for now, we can remove background and padding and just add a text element. And text element is kind of special as it has different modes. In the simplest one, you can just provide a text value like this, hello PDF. Okay, and it works, it's nice, but the text size on our page is kind of small. How we can modify the size or even the styling of the text? Well, the text element, what it does is to return a text span descriptor, which gives you additional options about how the text look like. So when we follow IntelliSense, we may find that we have access to a font size method. So let's say I will put 24 for now. You have access to the text length. So we let's use a semi-bold. You can change text color. This using our reload red color, and you can even add an underline. And when all styles are applied, they are about your text. However, as I said, our requirement today is to not only add a text in the footer, but we want also show the current page number and total number of pages. And in this mode, the simplest one, it is not possible. So therefore, we will use another overload of a text element, which gives us a descriptor like this. And inside that element, we can put multiple different contents. We'll use the simplest one called span. Basically, a span is just a part of your text. It can be a word, a sentence, something that is distinguished and unique and can have a custom styling method. So we have a span. We can just write a text inside this page number. Then after our span, we can add a current page number, then a text in between, and then in the end, a total number of pages. Okay, so I've used span to add text, just a basic simple text, and then I use additional methods available to insert a current page number and total number of pages. But hey, yet again, we have the same problem as before, that this text is quite small. And we can follow our previous approach, adding a custom text styling for each element, like this, font size 24, and maybe this one can be red. So as you see, we can apply different styles for different elements of our text, but it's not that convenient, is it? So we can use an approach called default text style. Well, using a lambda, we can assign the same style for all elements within the text run. So we are mostly interested just in the text size, like this. And notice we apply a default text style, but then, and it was applied for all 4 elements, but then in terms of the first span, a page number, it was overridden to be set of 24. So this way you can, like in waterfall, you can apply default text styles and then overload them. And the same approach is used in CSS, in HTML, isn't it? So I will just remove all those pieces that are not needed. We have our page number, and let's put it on the center. So right now it is moved to the left, and to make it centered, we can use align center element, like this. Okay, so we have our first page, And at the very bottom, we have page number 7 out of 7. Okay, so the next requirement that I would like to cover and discuss today is how to modify the header. I would like to put JetBrains logo on the left and maybe some document title on the right. Maybe we can imagine that we are writing an invoice system and we are generating an invoice PDF document. So therefore, if we want to have a logo on the left and then on the right of the logo we want to have text, we need to somehow split available space into two separate pieces. And to split content like this, we can use the row element, like this. So row element behaves similarly to the column one, just the direction is different. So in row element, we can use constant and relative items. A constant one takes a specified set of points, whereas a relative item divides available space proportionally. So just for now, as an example, I will use a relative item with some background and some height. And I will create a second relative item that is similar. Okay, maybe green. So as you see here, the row element took entire width available and divided it by 2. But each element, the blue one and green one, can use a different proportions. So I can put relative size of 1 to the blue rectangle and relative size of 3 to the green one. So in total, we have 4 places. Blue one will take 1/4 of available space, and the green one the remaining 3/4. Similarly, I can use a constant item that where I can specify the width in points or in our set of units. So let's say maybe 150 points. And from this point of view, I don't need to specify any additional relative size. So we took 150 points, and the remaining space is taken by the second item. Okay, so we have our backgrounds, and we now want to replace the blue area with a JetBrains logo. So in my project, I will just copy a JetBrains logo in here. Okay, we need to make sure that it's going to be copied during the build, and therefore, because I just added that file, we need to rebuild the project just to make sure that this logo file is present in the bin folder. Okay. Okay, it's built and we can run it. Perfect. Okay. So let's remove that blue area and use the image element. An image element can utilize, again, multiple different sources of data. It can just use a byte array, which corresponds to your file in any supported format. It can be JPEG, PNG, GIF, or whatever else. You can use a file stream. So for example, to open an existing file on your file system, or maybe you want to perform a call to a web server, but also you can quite conveniently use a file path, which is something that we want to do. So let me copy the name of that file and put it in here. Okay, so it does work quite nicely. So by default, the image element takes entire available space, which is limited by the row element to 150 points. And then it attempts to scale the image to preserve its aspect ratio. And in our case, the image is just a square, so it takes the same amount of pixels in width and height. But of course, there are multiple other options. It can scale to the available height, to available area, or even it can squish the content. So I can even show you how it works. So let's say we have limited height to 100 and limited width to 50. In such case, it will use the available width to properly scale, but I can use an option resize to squish the image so it takes all available space and the aspect ratio of an image is not preserved in such case.
I have a question. I'm not completely sure if it fits at this moment here, but I will ask it anyway.
Yeah, sure, please do.
Can I put a PDF on my PDF, e.g. default, for example, default layout was created by other coworkers, which should be put as a layer in my PDF. Now I was kind of remembered when we now started, or you with the logo, which could also theoretically be a PDF or something, or just the header completely, so.
So I'm afraid that it's not currently possible. Like QuestPDF focuses currently on just generating PDF files, and it is also a result of limitation of Skia Sharp. It can also only generate PDF files. So therefore, there is no an engine that opens and translates the PDF content. So to make the merge process possible. However, similar topics have been raised on the GitHub repository, and what I know, some people are generating their content using QuestPDF, and then merge that content with, let's say, some pre-made layout or other stuff using different libraries available in .NET. So it's
I was
certainly
also remembered of that.
possibility.
Yeah, could also be just a combination of two tools which do the job good, and then yeah. All right.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Otherwise we would need to write entire PDF abstraction layer in QuestPDF to enable that option of concatenating different documents or
Yeah,
alternating
true.
existing documents. And taking into account how complex the PDF standard is, it's just not viable at this point of time. I hope that it answers the questions.
I think so, yeah. They also said thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. I'm the one who should thank. Okay, so we have our JetBrains logo, and let's put some title to the right. So we already remember how to do it using the text element. So maybe, I don't know, JetBrains invoice. Okay, let's modify the size real quick. 48, and we can also adjust the font color. And maybe make text semi-bold. Oh, too much, definitely too much. Should be plenty. Okay, but what should we do to? So let's say we have our invoice title, but we want to put basic information about the company underneath. So below the title, how we can add that stuff? Well, again, we have all those building structures, and we can apply them anywhere. So we have an area on the left, area on the right, like this, debug area. And we'll just divide that, the second part using the column approach into a top and bottom. So in here, I will introduce a column element. The first element of that column will be our title text. And the second item will be just randomly generated text. So item.text. And in here, we can use another class that comes from QuestPDF. It is Placeholders, and it allows you to generate random content, great for prototyping purposes. So it can generate an image, a random color, maybe an email, label, paragraph, lorem ipsum text, whatever you want. And in this case, maybe I will just use a label. Okay, so we have one item.
That is so awesome. Very good idea.
Yeah, it is. So at least at my job, quite often you need to prepare a layout without having access to real data or even the model and its structure. So you need to somehow improvise something. And in such case, you can just put whatever you want, a random text. So if you just want to have a label, so 2 or 3 words, that's plenty. Or maybe you want to put more content like an image description. In such case, you can use paragraph. Or if you want to write a book, maybe you want to use paragraphs, which is even more content. So certainly, it's one of an option to quickly prototype your layout. And as before, we will use a for each loop to loop over and put multiple lines together. So enumerable range 1 to 3 for each, and let's just move that code in here. Okay, and in this case, let's just maybe remove that debug area. Okay, perfect. So when we zoom out, we have one more thing before we continue. So we have our logo, our text, but yet again, they are quite close to each other. So maybe we want to add a space in between. Similarly to the column approach and those gray boxes, we have a couple of options. We can add padding option to the right of an image, like this, which of course reduces the amount of space available for the image, but it adds that space. Or we can add a left padding to the title option, which is well visible when we come back with a debug area. So the relative item starts here, but we have that additional space introduced by the left padding. But
before for rows, no, for columns, you had the rows, columns.
Yeah, for columns.
But before you had the spacing method, exactly. Would that be the same then?
Exactly. So we have access to a spacing method, and we can provide a space in between our content. So if you have only 2 items, sorry. Okay, so if you have,
I said I'm sorry. I took it too much forward already.
No, it's perfect. I love when somebody interrupts and asks questions. It's always more interactive. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you have only 2 items in your row or 2 items in your column, but if you start to include more and more stuff and you want to have spacing consistently, using a special method designed for that task is certainly a huge helper. Okay, so we went through implementing all the document. We have a header structure, a content, and the footer structure, but quite honestly, we produced quite a lot of code. So let's try to organize it a little. And to do so, we can use a concept of local functions. So at the very bottom, I will write a method that will describe the content of a header. So it will be a void header, and as an argument, I will provide our interface iContainer, like this. You remember that when a method returns iContainer, you can continue the method chain and put more and more content inside. So having that container allows us to continue the chain inside a method. So let's copy the code of the header, this one, and put it in here, container, and we just continue the code. Like this. And now, once we have our header method, we can use it to populate our header slot. So in this case, we can use the element method and provide the name of our method that should be executed. Let's continue and perform the same change to the content and footer slots. We have content footer, and now we can quite easily just get the code and put in there.
I think you're one scope too much inside, if I'm not mistaken. Footer and content is now part of header. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
you're right. You're right. Let me fix it real quick. So we want to move those two methods. Put in there. Okay, so here we have our content and footer. Okay, so again, we introduced local functions and we changed the scope of Lambda, so we need to rerun the application. But I hope that this shows that even using the minimal API without any classes or interfaces, you can divide your code into smaller, manageable chunks, and then refer to those chunks within the API. So let's say you are a new person and you need to modify your existing document. It's certainly easier when you find, okay, I have a content slot, let's follow the method and see what's the implementation in here.
Now, I would be interested also, what would you think about the concept of using extension methods for that? So that I had an extension method, let's say, for invoice header, in which case I would save this header element header stuff. So have you seen this being used in the wild, or did you think about it already?
Yeah, I'm used it quite extensively. So you have choice. You can use either extension method or you can use the component, iComponent interface. So making the example real quick, let's create a sample extension method.
But that's also the great part, that you have the choice to design it as you wish, right? And you provided the extension points, which is first the having this interface, and that you can just add extension points to that, or having this element method to apply a local function or any function, let's say.
Okay, so I just created, or maybe I created a hello extension method for iContainer, so you can just follow the chain as before, and it will include that text inside. So having that extension method, in fact, all of those methods that we look right now, padding, column, spacing, item, most of them are extension methods. So we are just following the same concept that the library uses internally. So we have that, again, we have that hello extension method, and it suddenly becomes available everywhere where we have access to iContainer, like this. So it's quite small text, but it's certainly visible here. And I can use it not only in header, maybe I want to use it in each rectangle. So I will put hello, and it's everywhere now. You can also, so extension methods are great if you want to, when you want to produce a reusable style or something quite simple. But if your company, for example, wants to have a reusable header, and in all documents, all reports and invoices, you use the same header, you may consider creating a component. So, so there is a special interface called iComponent. This one. It introduces a new method called compose, and you probably already are familiar with this method. You get iContainer, and you can do whatever you want. So let's copy that code and put it like this. And having a component, which is quite an advanced stuff, I would say, in QuestPDF, you can instantiate it whenever you want. So instead of hello, we'll use a component. please notice that we have two choices, either a normal method that gets a component instance or a generic method. So in the generic one, you just provide your component class and it's being instantiated automatically for each invocation, and once we have an instance of that class, an object, the compose method is being called, and the content from inside is put in there. However, it works well when you have something that always repeats, but maybe you want to put content that is data-driven. So in such case, let's say we can introduce a constructor in our class that takes as an argument some maybe view model or a Poco class, or maybe something from your database, or maybe just in our example, just an ID. So it gets an ID as an constructor argument, it stores it in its own state, and from here we can reuse it and just show on each instance. And of course, it changes our class quite significantly. It no longer has a default constructor, so therefore it cannot be used in here as a generic argument. We need to provide a new instance like this, and we can provide state inside by a constructor. Or so maybe as a state, I will provide a current iteration number. So for each iteration of that loop, we create a new component. We push a state of that component inside. The compose method is called. It generates a new content, and then that content is being injected into into our, in this case, gray box. So again, you have multiple different choices how you can structure your code. Sometimes you want to do something very local, specific to your method, and in such case, using a local function is totally plenty. Sometimes you want to create a kind of a CSS style that applies both background, border, padding, and multiple other stuff. And in such case, the extension method would work best. And sometimes you want to create a usable layout or building structure, and let's say a reusable header that you put on all your reports. And in such case, having a component is the best choice.
From which you also can derive and re-implement certain parts, override them, etc.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Okay,
really
so
cool. Yeah.
Please remove those classes just for now, and let's continue. Yeah, we just changed the code so significantly that we need to rerun it once again. Okay, so the last part that I would like to show you in terms of this document development, I would like to introduce a simple table in here. So, maybe it is an invoice. We want to show iteration. So then, a row number, then a product name, and a unit price, number of units that has been bought, and a total price of that item. Okay, so we no longer need a column. We need to use a more sophisticated element, and in this case, it will be a table. And a table allows you to define a header, content, and footer. And similarly to the page element, header and footer are always visible. But okay, I just introduced a new element when oh my goodness, I need to rerun application once again. And this time I expect exception. So the table element is a special one. It needs to have a defined set of columns. So the exception says, please use the columns definition method. Okay, so if it says that way, let's make a try. Columns definition methods. And inside columns, we have yet another familiar API. If you remember, in row, we had access to constant items and relative items that have been dividing our available space into smaller chunks. And the same, or at least very similar API is used for table and columns. So you can use a relative column that divides your space proportionally, or you can use a constant column to specify the size in points. So let's make a try. I will use first of all number of row, product name, then it will be maybe quantity, price per item, and total price. So we need in total 5 columns. So the product name will be a relative column, so it will take all of the remaining space, and all of the others should be probably quite small, I guess. Like this. Okay, so we did what the exception asked us to do, and now we have a defined header. A defined set of columns within a table. So at this point, we can define the header. So table.header, and we can follow the nested call and add each cell separately. So header.cell, and let's just add text that we are interested in. So it will be number, product name, quantity, price, and maybe total. Okay, so in header that will be repeated on all pages, we put a couple of cells. Let's say that we want quantity, price, and total columns to be aligned to the right, so to make it more readable. So we use the align right method, like so. Okay, perfect. And at this point, we can also add a couple of cells. So cells are placed just in the table component, not in the header or footer. So like this, table.cell, and then just maybe a text. Okay, but I've noticed that our text size is quite small. It may be difficult to read for you. So let's come back for a little while to the default text style. So if you remember in here, we put a default text style within a text element, but sometimes you want to modify entire page, or maybe you want to make some decisions about typography. And in this case, you may want to change the text style everywhere on the page. So in here, we have access to yet another method, default text style. And in here, we can modify the font size, let's say to 16 pixels. So I hope it's slightly more readable for you.
Yep.
And again, please notice that we apply that default style, but that style can be overridden by elements that derive that style. So even though we have 16 here, it's being overridden by 36 in terms of the title. Okay, so we can come back to our table and let's generate maybe 25 different items. Okay. So again, in the real world implementation, we will not just generate 25 numbers or 25 items long list. You will just use a real list here from your model and iterate through each item with that list separately. And you will not have access to just a number, but it will be a real model that you can get, a product name, quantity, or a price, and then display that value in the table. Okay, so let's come back. And for each item, we want to randomize quantity and price. So yet again, we are using the placeholders class and random and generating the quantity. So maybe from 1 to 10 and a price. Random, maybe next the double from 100 to 10,000. And we'll divide it by 100.
I don't know any product that costs 10,000, but
Yep. Well, okay. So maybe change it.
oh, it's fine. It's fine.
I'm quite agile.
It's funny seeing those numbers then.
Okay, so 100. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
So, okay, perfect. So we can calculate the total in here, and it is just quantity times. Okay, so let's put our 5 cells for each element. So first of all, we have iteration number, iteration count, and then we have a product name. Again, perfect place to use placeholders, and in this case, maybe a label. And then we have quantity. Okay. A price. So price we can nicely format like this. It's in dollars, and similar approach can be used to a total value. Next double, where it is. Oh yeah, we need to multiply it. Okay, so we quite quickly generated a bunch of data. And if you remember, we have used an align right method to push a header cell's text to the right. We can use the same approach in here as well. So it looks slightly nicer, and both price and total, they collide with each other. So let's give them slightly more space. Okay, maybe, I don't know, 90. This is yet another place where having a previewer certainly helps a lot, as you can just experiment with your code. Like I can say, okay, maybe my quantity should be aligned to the center. So I quickly apply the change, and immediately I see the result.
I think that is one of the or it fits with one of the questions, if I'm not mistaken, but it should be the same. Is it possible to define the column width by the space needed by the longest text of all rows within the column? So from my understanding, is it like, could the table be more reactive, let's say without necessarily needing the previewer, just to say, let's say also here I want a little bit of spacing. You know what I mean, yeah?
So at this point, this functionality is not available in table. I'm experimenting with it, but it's available in the row elements. So we have relative, constant item, and you have also an auth item that measures your content, and depending on how much space it requires, it will make that column that wide. What makes it difficult in terms of tables is that tables can span multiple different pages, and therefore sometimes your content may require, on page 1 your content may require less space, and on content 2 it may require significantly more space. At the same time, when you think about it, it's not a web page. We don't need to be that responsive. We don't change the size of the page. So in such cases, you actually may want to have a really well-defined width of your columns. So it doesn't matter what data do you have always a stable layout. Yeah, but yet again, it's something that I seriously consider to implement. To have that, auto column that takes a look at all children associated and then tries to automatically calculate the perfect width. At some point of time, it becomes even more difficult as the table component allows you to span over multiple rows or multiple columns. So let's say, just for the sake of an example, I will use a new cell. And in here you can, well, you might have find that in this example, we're just putting a cell after cell, and those cells, those mini containers are automatically put in the proper place. However, if you want, you can specify the position of your child very specifically. So let's say I will put something in the column 3 and the row 5, and I will assign some background to that cell. And maybe some height just to make sure it's visible. And it's in here. So even though that cell was already taken by the quantity, later I was able to put yet another cell in here and provide some content. Additionally, you can not only specify the column and row numbers, but also spans. So let's say that this element will span over 2 columns and over 3 rows. Right? Something like this.
Now I'm wondering if you managed to, at the same time, also read the chat, because it was just asked.
Yeah, no, I don't have access to chat. Okay, so yeah, and when you have just a simple row with a couple of slots, using the automated calculation is quite simple. But if you are working with a table and you accept the fact that a single cell can be taken by multiple containers, like in this case, and moreover, some cells can span multiple rows and multiple columns, such calculation becomes very difficult and maybe not deterministic. So
Okay.
at this point, I
think
consider maybe just put specific values and be stable.
But maybe to clarify, because I still want this answer to be answered properly. Does this also mean, because we didn't have it in this example, that you can have, let's say, a description underneath one item that spans across all the columns? So not just in terms of styling, but also in terms of content that is shown, the text?
Yeah, of course. So
Yeah,
let's
okay.
suppose we will add a short description about each item. So this cell adds our product name. So if you remember, what we can do to increase number of containers, we can use a column or a row element. And of course, well, technically I can even create a table within a table if I want. It's still a container. But in this case, let's keep it simple and use the column approach. And as a first item, unfortunately, I have removed that code. So get it again. Column item. And as the first item, we'll put our original text, so nothing changes apart from a randomly generated text. But then I can put another item, and let's say it will be a description, so maybe a sentence. And to make that description even more meaningful, I will decrease the font size, let's say to 10 points, and make it slightly grayish, so grayish. So font color like this. So yes, well, the cell again returns you the iTable cell container, which derives or implements the iContainer interface, and therefore you can continue that method chain with whatever content you want. You can put a column in here, you can put an image, you can put a text, a table, a link, whatever you want.
That's awesome.
So
really, really great.
So let's say that for each item, we can create a hyperlink. So when user clicks, or yeah, maybe in here, and when user clicks on that item, we will redirect him into the QuestPDF page. QuestPDF.com. Okay, so this is one of the limitations of current previewer. Links do not work, but we can always generate a valid document. And in here, when I click on the link, I'm just being redirected into another page. And of course, you can, for example, I can, let's say I may make those links dynamic, so I can something like this. Okay, just a small restart. So this way, it makes all link unique. So when I click on it, we have that additional part that is usually used by front-end frameworks.
Or UTMs and stuff like that we can use with that.
Yeah, exactly. So should I elaborate more about this question, or can we consider it as
I think it's done.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have a lot of more questions. So my suggestion, unless you have other plans, you can also tell me. But my suggestion would be we go through the rest of the questions, probably since about the time and all, maybe just yes, no, without or a little bit of elaboration, of course, but without actual code samples.
Okay,
and
good,
then
sure.
see if we can wrap it up. Yeah. Okay, so let me go through. There were a couple of interesting ones. So we talked about the page numbers. Is it possible for the data itself to fill the required page numbers? Oh yeah, that was the same.
Yeah, you can. You can even so this current page number gives you a method format, and you can modify. So you get a number of that page, and you can translate it into whatever format you want. So, for example, a Roman numeral if you want.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice.
you get a value, and you can just change its format.
Then there was another question. Are there any plans for drag and drop, just like in MS Access or Crystal reports? Oh man, I worked with Crystal reports like 12 years ago, I remember.
Yeah, well, so I strongly believe that in longer run, you want to write all your documents in real C# code, as you get all things like IntelliSense, a humor-readable code, something that you are already aware and familiar with. And not to mention that such code is easier to maintain and to version control. So at this point of time, I'm not planning any visual designers. However, I would like to increase the previewer capabilities with, for example, an inspect method. So let's imagine that you click on the on this text, and it can show you entire document hierarchy or structure to describe you the position, the required space, maybe constraints, all associated children and parents, maybe similar functionality. But
we had another
visual
project
designer,
which
I don't think so.
Huh? Say again?
But in terms of visual designer, at this point, I'm not planning any implementations.
We had once it comes, there's a for the inspector. We also had Snoop once here as a guest with Bastian. If you want that might be good. How to say inspiration? Okay,
Definitely.
next question. Can you access the low-level API like from Skia Sharp?
Yes, you can. You have access to the canvas method, which gives you access to the canvas element. And this is a really great question. So many times I'm asked, how you can include the chart in your document. So the most obvious answer is use any library you want, generate a chart image, and just include that image inside. But of course, you have limited resolution. It's an image. You cannot zoom in infinitely. So the good approach is to use a canvas element with Skia canvas. And if you have a library that is also Skia Sharp powered, you can combine both QuestPDF and that library. And one of the examples, if I can show you, it will be in here somewhere. Charts. Implementing charts. So in this example, I've used a fantastic library microcharts, which is also created with Skia Sharp. And what it does is to get it gets a canvas, available space on the page, and using that canvas, I can provide it to the microcharts library itself, and it draws all the pieces on the canvas. So as a result of that, all operations performed by microcharts are being translated into the PDF commands. And that result is a vector graphics. You can zoom in, everything is sharp, the file size is smaller, and well, it just works great.
That's also when different, like we said also before, with about what was it, the merging stuff of when you have the layout already but want to provide the content. This is another great example where different tools can work almost seamlessly together.
Precisely.
We have, okay, that's not a question, but I still want to read it. Bless your heart for this extensive and concise documentation, just since we had another look on it. Then hopefully just yes or no because of time, you know.
Okay.
Is it possible to add bookmarks in the PDF? You don't have to show it, just say if it's possible.
You can add sections and annotations. I believe that there is no existing API for bookmarks in Skia Sharp, and therefore QuestPDF derives that limitation.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, let me scroll through. Is it possible to show a different header on page 1 versus page 2? I would say
it is
so.
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have elements like skip once or show once that can be used to modify visible content. And in the next release of QuestPDF, I'm planning to introduce a dynamic component in which we'll be able to generate totally custom content depending on the current page and current state of that component. So it can be used for subtotals in your invoice table, for example. So certainly just wait for that next release.
Yeah. Then can we have mixed fonts for different sections? I think that boils down to what you've shown recently with the additional row or table inside table cell. Yeah. So
That's correct.
I would say
You
yes.
can use different styles, different font families, whatever you want.
Yeah. Any reverse engineering taking a PDF template to code, that we also just answered, I would say. Any option to use Cyrillic fonts? Would that work?
So to be honest, I'm not sure. I know, so in these terms we are mostly limited by Skia Sharp, but as far as I know, if you use correct font file, it should just work out of the box. They are also languages that are significantly more complex, like Arabic, and in such cases you need additional process called text shaping, and this process will be introduced in the near future.
Okay. And then I think that is the last question then. Are there functions to print PDF out of code, for instance, for Windows, or can you recommend anything for sending PDF to a printer?
No, I have no API that connects to the printer, unfortunately. If somebody has knowledge how to implement such thing, on each operating system, it would be certainly quite useful for many people.
So every time you run, it prints another document with hot reload. Maybe, I don't know. All right, I think that's it. I hope we covered all the questions. I will remove your screen already, just
Okay.
talking the two of us. So first of all, thanks. This was a great presentation. I'm always looking forward to this format, but today I should say we had particularly a lot of questions, a lot of people thanking or sending thanks to you. I just picked a couple just to show you, but there are a lot. So maybe if you like, just go through the recording afterwards. But yeah,
I will
thanks
certainly
again.
do. It's a great inspiration to take from, and I'm delighted to help. If you have any additional questions, I suggest going to the GitHub repository. There are plenty of different discussions and GitHub issues. So most likely you'll find some answers there or in the documentation. And if you don't find any answer or you need any feature, just please ask.
Right. So I also put the reference or the slide for more information on the screen. QuestPDF.com. Marcin Ziąbek. I hope I got
That
it
was
right.
a great pronunciation.
Okay, good. And QuestPDF on GitHub as well. Thanks also to everyone who was watching. Thanks for the mass on comments and questions you've brought here. Would be great to have you next episode as well, of course. Next time, I think who we're gonna have Nicholas Broomhart from Serilog. So I'm very much looking forward to that as well. And just once more, thank you, Marcin. Thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.